All right, you asked for it, you're getting it. We're doing position rankings for every single defensive position group today. And keep in mind, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be giving out all the grades for every single defensive player I've watched. That would take a long time, but I do have probably about 70 to 80 players listed here at various positions, which is usually about 4.5 to 5 rounds worth of defensive players in any given draft. So we do still have a lot to talk about today. I'm not going to waste any more of your time here because I can already tell this is going to be a really long episode. So let's just dive into our first position group, off-ball linebackers. And again, remember, this is going to be a tier system, not just a kind of linear 1 through 15 or 1 through 20 ranking, because honestly, a lot of these guys have very different skill sets. They come in all shapes and sizes. It's almost impossible to compare them apples to oranges in a lot of cases, so I don't even try to do that. I just want to get them into the right neighborhood, into the right tiers, and then within those tiers, you can kind of order them in whatever way you want to, honestly. Again, it just depends on the system they're going to, their particular skill set. As long as I get them into the right tier and I can kind of project their proper skill set into the right defensive fit for them, that's kind of all I really care about. Really, my only exception in this group is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, as you all probably guessed, who I think fits any system. You can kind of throw him into whatever defense you want to, and you can find a role for him. And that's why I think he's kind of in his own tier at the very top of this class. Not that his grade is that much higher than the tier 2 guys, but just the fact that you can really fit him in whatever defense, that I think is unique for him. In tier 2, we kind of have a mishmash of different guys that are all in this tier for different reasons. Micah Parsons is probably the most talented guy in this group, but he's also kind of brand new to the position. He's only played linebacker, and I mean like a true linebacker position, for 2 years now. He was actually a defensive end recruit coming out of high school. He was a 5-star, but Penn State moved him to linebacker because they just wanted to get him on the field. And again, he was good there. Like, you can see really how far along he's come in 2 years. He gets off blocks well. I mean, obviously he's just lightning fast in pursuit. But, I mean, there's still a lot that he's got to learn about how to play like a true Mike linebacker role. I mean, he'll run himself into blocks pretty frequently. He kind of plays the position like a defensive end, where he'll just prioritize holding the outside edge. And he doesn't really play with, I guess you could say, the same creativity as like a Jamin Davis, a Zavin Collins, Cam Mcgrone, all those kind of guys. He's not going to like wrong arm a pulling guard and just completely gum up the angles of a run play. He's not going to like stack and peek and shed. He's just going to attack that outside shoulder and just kind of hope that everybody else around him does their jobs and cleans it up, where, in my opinion, a linebacker's role should really be cleaning up for everyone else. He plays like a defensive lineman, where it's just disruption and disruption and disruption, and he just hopes that everybody covers for him and makes plays off of that disruption. But I kind of think it should be the other way around, and he hasn't really learned how to play that style yet, where if your defensive linemen get beat in front of you, you can still make a play. He just doesn't do that yet. So I recognize he's extraordinarily talented, but there's still kind of a ways to go with him. Meanwhile, you have Zavin Collins, who's also, again, just another freak athlete. He's 6'4", somewhere between 260 and 270. He weighed in at 270 at the medical combine recently. He runs 4.6. He's long. He's strong. I mean, he's really everything you want in just a gigantic throwback inside linebacker, almost kind of like a Dante Hightower mold, which I guess makes sense of why the Patriots are linked to him, because he's a perfect fit for what they do. My one hang-up with him, and I literally mean my one hang-up, I don't really have any problems with him on tape at all other than this, is I don't really know how to project Tulsa's defense to the NFL, because they do stuff that most NFL defenses just don't do. It's a lot of, 3-down stuff, tight fronts, okie fronts, 505, all that kind of stuff that you see in college all the time with 8-man drops in zone coverage. And again, he executed that system extraordinarily well. He made good reads. I never felt like he looked lost at all. I think he's a really smart player, but the NFL fronts and the run fits that go with those fronts are just different. It's more 4-down stuff. It's more 5-down stuff. And I asked a whole bunch of linebacker coaches, somewhere between 10 and 12 of them, I would say. I did it a few months ago. And I asked them, how long does it take to reprogram a linebacker to kind of read run fits in a 4 and 5 down front compared to a 3 down front? How long does that take to learn to do if you're not used to it? And they were dead even split on the subject. Some of them said they could do it in a training camp. Some said they could do it in one off season. Sometimes they said it would take as long as a year. One of them even said they teach both at the same time between, nesting from the A gap to the C gap in tight front, while also teaching them, all the lever stuff that you see in a 4 down front, where you're kind of incorporating the nickel and the run fit and stuff like that. So I don't really have a clear answer of how long it's going to take him to learn to read in the NFL game, because even coaches that coach the position disagree on that. So again, I don't have any problems with Zavin Collins on tape. I think he's a phenomenal player. I don't know. I don't know how long it's going to take for him to transition. And then you got Jamin Davis, who, he's a freak athlete. He's got length. He's got speed. He's got zone coverage ability. I don't really have any questions about, translating Kentucky's defense to the NFL level. He's done a lot of stuff that NFL defenses do already. I don't really have any problems with Davis at all. He's not quite as quick and explosive as Owusu-Koramoah, but I think he's just absolutely fantastic against the run. I think he reads things very well in between the tackles. I think he's a pro-ready linebacker to start from day one and be really, really productive. Almost like a Zach Cunningham type profile when he was coming out of Vanderbilt, but even faster than Zach Cunningham. And, that was my one problem with Cunningham coming out. And I said it in my film room on him before he got drafted was, I know what his time speed is, but his play speed on film, he doesn't really get to the edge that well. He's not a true sideline to sideline linebacker, whereas Jamin Davis is. He comes with the instincts, he comes with the physicality, but he's got the speed on top of that. And that's why he's a really, really gifted linebacker prospect that I'm very, very high on. And then, last but not least in tier 2, you got Cam Mcgrone, who I mentioned in an episode not too long ago. He's coming off of multiple major injuries, so we don't really have any testing numbers from him, but he looks really fast on tape. He looks really physical on tape. Not the biggest dude in the world. He's about 6 foot, 235, if I remember correctly. So he's about kind of that Eric Kendricks size, and he plays a lot like Kendricks too. He's not quite as instinctive in zone coverage as Kendricks is, but he's certainly athletic enough to do it, in my opinion. I think if you give him to a really good linebacker coach like a Vic Fangio, a Jeff Ulbrich, Ulbrich is the new DC for the Jets, by the way, if you didn't know that. You give him to a really good coaching staff that knows how to develop linebackers, and I think he could be a Pro Bowl caliber player, sooner rather than later. He's really, really phenomenal. His tape grade for me, and I know this is going to sound sacrilegious, but on tape, he was kind of the player in 2019 that I think people thought Micah Parsons was. Like, he was doing stuff instinctually and in terms of taking on and getting off blocks and all that kind of stuff. Like, he was kind of the guy that I think was more impressive among all those great Big Ten linebackers than Micah Parsons. And that's nothing against Parsons. Again, Parsons is a freak of nature. I think he's got an extraordinarily high ceiling, but he's still learning to play the position, whereas Mcgrone already knows how to play the position. So if you want a really fast sideline-to-sideline linebacker and you miss out on Jamin Davis, you want somebody with an extremely high ceiling, but who can also come in and just kind of be a day one starter for you that you're not worried about making mistakes, Cam Mcgrone is your guy. In tier 3, we have a bunch of linebackers that I think might be a little bit more scheme specific, especially looking at guys like, Derek Barnes, Chaz Surratt. I think they can be very good players if they are in the right defense that kind of maximizes what they do well. For instance, Barnes is a great pass rusher, especially for an off-ball linebacker. He's probably the best pass rushing off-ball linebacker in this whole class, and I'm including Micah Parsons in that. He's got such a natural feel for it, really good pop on contact. He's absolutely relentless, but he's not quite as fluid as Parsons. I don't think his ceiling is as high as Parsons in terms of scheme versatility. You kind of want to use him like New England uses Dante Hightower, who I'm going to bring up a lot in this episode, or at least in this linebacker section, because a lot of guys kind of compare to him. I see him in that kind of role where we have him as a true Mike linebacker that can just make plays in between the tackles. You're never going to use him in coverage, or at least if you can afford not to, you're never going to use him in coverage. That's really not his game. But again, you're going to use him over guards, over centers, sometimes over a tackle if you want to get, really frisky with how you use your linebackers as pass rushers. He can do it all. Again, he's really vertically explosive, even though he's not super agile laterally, which is why I don't think he's good in coverage, but he's certainly explosive enough, he's physical enough to be a good pass rushing linebacker, which can then kind of open up your defense to use a lot of really different unique fronts like New England uses, like Miami uses. The Giants, kind of have that style of defense as well, where they're going to use their linebackers on the line of scrimmage as pass rushers pretty frequently. I even think like a Mike Zimmer, using him like how he uses Anthony Barr in those double mug looks. They don't really expose Anthony Barr to coverage if they can afford not to, because he's not really going to hold up, matching a slot receiver deep down the field. That's not really his game. But if you can use Anthony Barr as a pass rusher, get him matched up with the center, have him crush the pocket, that's where he really excels. And I think Derek Barnes is going to be that kind of guy. I would also say that Pete Werner from Ohio State falls into that mold, just super vertically explosive. He's a little bit better in coverage than Barnes, I would say, but he's not quite the pass rusher, so you're kind of taking a little bit out of one end and you're adding to the other end. He's a little bit more well-rounded, but I do think that a system that prioritizes blitzing linebackers is going to make good use of him because he's very good at it. I would also say he's a really physical run defender in between the tackles. He can get kind of a little bit ahead of himself and maybe lose gap discipline from time to time because he's ultra aggressive, but I certainly don't think he's a bad run defender. He's just not as good at it, or at least not as disciplined, I would say, as, many of the guys in tier 2 above him. But physically speaking, he's a freak athlete. He's super aggressive, ultra high ceiling, and I think he's going to be a good player provided he goes to a coaching staff that can kind of maximize those blitzing abilities and really use him as a pass rusher as much as they can. Jabril Cox and Chaz Surratt, on the other hand, I think are a little bit more on the other side of the spectrum. I have no qualms with them being in coverage all day long. Surratt and Cox, they have a really good natural feel for zone coverage. Surratt, specifically being a former quarterback, he has a really good understanding of offenses, great at reading patterns and route recognition, all that kind of stuff. I think he's kind of a good modern undersized linebacker. And if you miss out on Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, you can get a Chaz Surratt later in the draft who's not quite as physically gifted, but I think can play a similar sort of role. Obviously, you're not going to use him as a nickel like you would with JOK, but in terms of like matching up with tight ends down the field, matching up with running backs in space, occasionally being your 3-up as 3 player. That's basically the terminology for a guy that has to carry the number 3 receiver deep down the field. Like Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright do that all the time, or at least did do that all the time in Seattle. Like he can do that for you. And Jabril Cox, I think, is the same way. Like we actually saw him do that at LSU where he's carrying receivers deep down the field and, getting pass breakups. And he's very, very impressive as a coverage linebacker. And then last but not least in this tier, you have Monty Rice, who's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. He's not as athletic as, Pete Werner and Derek Barnes, but he has a lot of really good zone coverage ability, or I'll just say zone coverage awareness, like a Chaz Surratt and a Jabril Cox. Like he's got really disciplined eyes in coverage. He's always in the right spot. But he brings a little bit more size and physicality in between the tackles than I would say either Cox or Surratt do. So again, he's kind of like a good in-between option, just a solid all-around player. He's going to be a special teams demon for you. And I think he's going to be in the league for a long time because a smart, disciplined linebacker who at least runs 4.6, like he's not a speed demon, but he's not slow. Those kinds of linebackers tend to stick in the league for a long time, and I think he's going to be a very, very solid football player. Now, next up we have edge rushers, which in my opinion is one of the deepest and most talented position groups in this entire draft. It's not as flashy at the top as in some years, I'll give you that. Like there's no like Chase Young, there's no Myles Garrett, anything like that. But to be honest, the anchor players at the very top are still really, really good, and the depth behind them is some of the best I've seen in probably the last 10 years. You might have to go back to 2011 with that first round list of pass rushers. You had J.J. Watt, you had Aldon Smith, Von Miller, Cam Jordan. I mean, again, we're talking about a whole decade that you have to go back to, in my opinion, get the same level of depth at this position group. There's a lot of really good players, even if they're not all going to go in the top 10. Hell, we might not even get any going in the top 10. Honestly, there's going to be a lot of really productive guys to come out of this class, assuming they go to the right team, of course. I just want to put that caveat on there, but I'm really excited to see what they do. Now, of course, my one tier 1 player that I have here is Jalen Phillips. I did a film room on him. It's kind of a theme that my tier 1 players are the ones that I've done film rooms on this year, but he really is phenomenal. The one knock that you can say is the injury history, the concussions, but in terms of just pure tape grade, he is utterly ridiculous. He is the best edge rusher in this class to me. The best combination of explosiveness, fluidity, length, power, technical ability. I mean, he's got everything. Like, again, just in pure tape grade. I'm not talking about testing numbers. I'm not talking about off the field stuff. Just in tape grade, he is a hair under all of those other top pass rushers from the last decade. You know, the Bradley Chubbs, the Chase Youngs, the Myles Garretts, like he's not that far below them. And I think that says a lot about really how high I am on him, because Chase Young still is the highest grade I've ever given to a pass rusher. Jalen Phillips is not that far behind. You can probably knock him again for the injury history, so he's going to go later than I think he should. But just as a football player, he is a top 10 talent to me that will likely slip into the teens or into the 20s. And I think he's going to end up being a Pro Bowl, perhaps even all-pro caliber pass rusher at some point in his career. In tier 2, it's kind of similar to the linebackers. You got a mishmash of different skill sets and body types and scheme fits all kind of thrown together here. If I had to pick one that I thought was eventually going to be an all-pro, I'd probably say Joe Tryon out of Washington. Like, in terms of overall grade, he would probably end up as the highest for me. He's got a lot of scheme versatility, and you saw that at Washington. Like, they would play, odd fronts where he's playing 4-eye and taking on double teams. He would rush off the edge from like a 2-point stance. So if you want to play him as like an outside linebacker, he can do that. They would drop him into coverage every now and then. He's a really phenomenal athlete. He's got length and power. He plays the run with physicality and discipline. Like, he is the closest thing to Jalen Phillips in this class to me. And that's saying a lot. Phillips, I think, has better hips, and so I think his ceiling is higher because I really prioritize like hip fluidity in pass rushers, regardless of their build and everything like that. Like, you got to have good hips no matter what. And so I think Phillips's hips are a little bit better than Tryon's, but again, it's not by much. He's one of the only guys that I saw actually move Penei Sewell backwards. So that's the kind of, pocket crushing ability I'm talking about. And if you want to get a good idea of just what he is as a football player, just watch the Utah game from 2019. At least I think it was the 2019 season because he opted out in 2020. And I mean, he was everywhere in that game. As a run defender, as a pass rusher, he did everything. And he did it at an exceptionally high level. Now, slightly behind him, and again, you can kind of put these guys in any order just depending on the system that you're in, but Peyton Turner is not that far behind Joe Tryon in terms of overall grade to me. He's a little bit harder to project as a system fit because he's like a 280-pound defensive end that would rush from a 2-point stance. Like, he's a freak athlete, and they used him like a freak athlete. The closest like physical comparison I can think of where you just have this big, almost defensive tackle size defensive end that can also rush as a linebacker is Cam Jordan. He's the only one that I can really think of that even comes close to that. And not to mention that Peyton Turner also has 35-inch arms, just like Cameron Jordan. So the fact that they can win with length and power, but he's also got really good hips for his size. I think he had somewhere in like the neighborhood of a 7-second 3-cone, which again, for a guy that's like 6'5", 6'6", and 280 is ridiculous. Like, he is a truly phenomenal athlete. And I wouldn't be surprised that if he's used in the same way that Cam Jordan has been used traditionally in his career, where he plays base end, you can rush him inside, you can rush him outside, and he'll win with that length and power and technique and kind of the ability to finish with his hips, even if he's not the most explosive guy. Like, that's a lot of tools that you can work with. And I think Peyton Turner is going to be a really, really good player. Now, the rest of Tier 2, again, it's kind of a shotgun approach here. We got Kwity Paye, who's interesting dimension-wise. Like, he's 6'2", 260, so he's kind of like a sawed-off shotgun. He's got 33-inch arms, so he's got enough length to me, but he plays with so much power and physicality. Like, he's a phenomenal run defender. Kind of reminds me of like a stronger version of Everson Griffin, or at least we hope that he can eventually turn into Everson Griffin. He doesn't have the same, I would say, polish as a pass rusher, but in terms of, front versatility, like you can line him up as a base end, like you can play him inside as a 3 technique, even at 260, just because he's so unbelievably powerful. Like, again, he's kind of that guy that you can move all over the place. You can rush him from a variety of stances and alignments, and he's just so powerful and so explosive that I think his ceiling is really, really high. You have Ronnie Perkins, who I think to me is more of an outside linebacker than a true defensive end. He's over 250 pounds, so theoretically he could play defensive end, but I kind of like him better as a linebacker in a 2-point stance. He's one of those guys that I think converts speed to power really, really well in this class. He's a very high effort player, just relentless as a pass rusher. Not nearly as fluid as some of the other top guys. Like, he's certainly not Kwity Paye or Jalen Phillips in terms of hip fluidity, so there is a little bit of a limitation there, but again, the effort, the power, I think he's got some really nice counter moves off of that speed to power as well. I think he's going to be a quality player in the NFL and a very good kind of 3-down outside linebacker. Azeez Ojulari, I think, also kind of fits that description. Just a very instinctive, high-effort run defender as an outside linebacker. I think he's a little bit more limited as a pass rusher than Ronnie Perkins, and I say that because his go-to move is a cross chop, and then he doesn't really have anything else. Like, if you're a one-move pass rusher in the SEC, like, that can work, but when you're going up against freak of nature left tackles like Ronnie Stanley, a Laramie Tunsil that have seen cross chops every day of their career, you got to get something else. So I don't really think he has a lot of power to kind of act as a changeup. Like Shaq Barrett, he uses the cross chop more than anyone, and it works for him, but he also has some other moves as a changeup. He's got really good speed to power. He's got an inside spin. Like, he does other stuff, and I feel like Azeez Ojulari hasn't really developed himself enough counter moves at this time to be a true pass rush threat. He'll get some sacks, don't get me wrong, because again, that cross chop is just wicked, but I want to see him develop kind of an off-speed pitch every now and then that can actually reliably get some sacks for him, because I don't really think he has that yet. And then rounding out Tier 2, I mean, this is just pure athletic projection. It seems to be kind of a theme with Penn State lately, as they just pump out athletes that aren't really developed as football players yet, but their athletic ceiling is so absurdly high that you got to take them anyway. That's Jason Owe, who, I mean, he just barely started playing football, guys. I'm going to cut him some slack. Just like Micah Parsons, I cut him some slack on not knowing how to play linebacker because he's only done it for 2 years. I'm cutting Jason Owe some slack because he was a basketball player up until basically 2016, 2017. Like, he is brand new to this. He doesn't really know what he's doing yet. He doesn't really have great hands as a pass rusher because he doesn't know what to do. Like, he's improved every year that he's been there. Like, his run defense in 2019 was god-awful, and then he really, really improved as a run defender in 2020. So I know he can get better. I know he's coachable, and I know he's a freak athlete. You just kind of have to trust your coaching staff and that they're going to get the best out of him going forward because, man, it is a pure projection. Again, phenomenal athlete, high-effort player. I think he's coachable, but you got to do a lot of work to kind of get him where you want him to be. Now, in Tier 3, the first guy on this list, honestly, you could argue for him to be in Tier 2. I wouldn't be surprised if he even went ahead of a couple guys from Tier 2 because his ceiling is extraordinarily high, kind of like a Jason Owe, and that's Ellerson Smith from Northern Iowa. Like, you watch him on tape, again, it's more of that 3-down front stuff, so it's a lot of taking on double teams. But the fact that this guy who's 6'7", with a super long wingspan, with a 41.5-inch vertical, and much better hips than you would expect for somebody with his build, the fact that he's already kind of that well trained in terms of how to play the run as a guy who just absorbs double team after double team, like he's a very good stack and shed run defender, and the fact that he also brings versatility as a pass rusher as well. I mean, he is lightning quick off the edge. Again, much better bend than you expect. And he's got length that, to me, that is a true threat to tackles. Like, if you land a long arm move with arms, no pun intended, that are as long as his, like, there's not a whole lot of tackles with the reach that are going to be able to recover from that. The one knock on him, and it's not even really a knock, that's not even fair, but the one negative note that I'll have on him is that he hasn't really played football in a while. He didn't get a 2020 season because of the pandemic, obviously, so he might be a little bit rusty, but also the fact that it was a lower competition level. You know, he's absolutely dominating all these tackles that are never, ever going to be in the NFL. You know, how is that going to work out for him when he's in the league with a bunch of guys that are equally talented? And he had a decent Senior Bowl. I'm not going to say it was great, so he held up there, but he certainly didn't dominate at the rate that he dominated when he was at UNI. So overall, I think he's a little bit more of a projection. Obviously, I love the talent, I love the length, I love the power, I love his run defense on tape. Like, honestly, his tape is great. It's just the fact that he's coming from a lower level, so it's a little bit harder to project. But I wouldn't be surprised if he went ahead of some of the tier 2 guys. It wouldn't shock me at all because, again, great tape plus great athletic testing usually equals pretty great football player. I guess we'll see. Maybe I'm going to look stupid for putting him in tier 3 just because he played at UNI. But, you know, again, there's a lot of good edge rushers in this class. It was kind of hard for me to find where to slot him. Now, just behind Smith, I do have Gregory Rousseau, and again, when I kind of have all these guys stacked in tiers, you could argue for them in any order. There's a lot of people that really like Rousseau for his length and his power and obviously the production. I more kind of project him to be like a Charles Omenihu type player where he's not really a true edge rushing threat. He's more of a base end on early downs, then you kick him inside and he can rush with that length and power against guards and centers and all this kind of guys. Like, again, there's a role for him there, but he is not the game-changing edge rush threat that I think he was kind of billed as going into the 2020 season. Like, he's not that kind of guy, and I think the athletic testing reflects that. Really subpar vert, really subpar 3-cone. He's got the length going for him. He's got the power and the size and all that, but it's really kind of a limited role in my opinion. I think it's a very similar situation to AJ Epinesa last year, who ended up going in the second round to the Bills. I wouldn't be surprised if a team that wants that style of base end that can also rush inside, I wouldn't be surprised if they take him on day 2, but for a team that's looking for like a pure speed rusher off the edge, they're not going to want him at all. So it's tough for me to tell where he's going to go because I think his role is just so limited. And then rounding out tier 3, I have Jonathan Cooper from Ohio State and Boogie Basham, who I think are kind of similar players, or at least might play similar roles. Jonathan Cooper and Boogie, I think, can both play that base end role on early downs, but they'll contribute more as pure edge rushers than Rousseau would because they both have really good hips. Like, they're both really laterally agile. Like, you look at the 3-cone times and that kind of backs it up. Like, they both have really good hips, so I think they can have more of an impact as early down pass rushers off the edge. But I think when you look at their size and power and everything like that, you can kick them inside in nickel and have them go against guards and probably obliterate them there as well. Almost like a Michael Bennett type role, if you remember how he used to play in Seattle as a base end and then kick inside in nickel. You can use Cooper or Boogie like that, and I think both of them can have a lot of success doing that. Especially Cooper, by the way. Like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes ahead of Rousseau because I think flat out he's just more talented. He doesn't have the length or the power, but again, you look at his hips, you look at his technique. I mean, Ohio State defensive linemen, you can pretty much guarantee they're going to be well coached, and he certainly is. Jonathan Cooper is just a very, very underrated player in this class, and I personally think he's going to go a lot higher than people think he is. Tier 4 now, and we have a really interesting group here. We have Rashad Weaver, Dayo Odinyibo. God, I hope I didn't mess that up too badly. I really apologize if I did. We also have Malcolm Koontz and Joseph Osai from Texas. Rashad Weaver, he kind of falls under that category of, you love the hands, you love the hips, but he's just not an explosive athlete. I love so much about him, and his pressure rate was insanely high, again, because he's got great hands, he's got great hips, so when he wins initially with his hands, he has the hips to bend and flatten and get the sack, get the pressure, everything like that. But when you're going up against NFL tackles that also have good hands and good length and good explosiveness, like, you're not going to be able to win just like that at the NFL level. You also have to bring some raw speed and power to the table to set up all the moves that you're doing with your hands. And I just don't think he has that. I think he's going to be a solid rotational pass rusher because, again, he's really technically refined. And I think when he does beat somebody, he can finish it. Not a lot of pass rushers can finish it. He's a very good finisher, but it's just that initial burst, that initial pop on contact that I just don't think he has. Now, Dayo, I think you could argue, might have been a better version of what Boogie Basham Jr. and what Jonathan Cooper offer in terms of, you play a base end, but you also have, for lack of a better word, the ass mass to be an interior rusher and nickel packages. Like, he could do that. He's very, very talented, and his pass rush win rate reflects that. But he did just recently tear his Achilles, so he's not going to be ready for training camp. He might not even be ready till halfway through the season, if that. So you're looking at him losing his entire rookie campaign and probably really not being himself if he ever does get back to that level athletically until, partway into his second year in the league. So he's going to drop pretty significantly. But his tape is good. His tape is legitimately really good. And then after Dayo, I've got Malcolm Koontz from Buffalo and Joseph Osai. Osai is as raw as can be as an edge rusher. Like, he's more of an athlete right now because he's a converted off-ball linebacker. I mean, they played him at like 5 technique a lot at Texas rather than just, lining him up in like a wide 9 and letting him go. I personally would have used him that way because the dude is a 41.5-inch vert. He's ultra explosive, but just doesn't really know what he's doing. If you're looking for a project that you can stash away, but you don't want to pay the price that it's going to cost to get Jason Owe, go get Joseph Osai. He's a high motor player. He's learning the position. He's super athletic. Like, he can do it. You're just going to need to invest some time. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going to the Ravens because they love taking day 2 pass rushers that they can invest some time in, and then they love letting them walk after their rookie deals and getting a bunch of money and then getting another day 2 pick out of the compensatory pool that they can then use on another pass rusher to develop. It's kind of the endless cycle with them, and I think Joseph Osai is kind of ripe for that, in my opinion. And then Malcolm Koontz, again, kind of touching on him out of Buffalo. He's probably the best defensive player to come out of Buffalo since Khalil Mack. Interesting kind of size profile. He almost looks like Khalil when he was coming out of Buffalo. He's not quite as rocked up, but in terms of, the build and the length and the bend for an outside linebacker, it's kind of eerie how similar it looks sometimes. He's got a really nice dip and rip. He's very, very fluid. I love his hips. I love his explosiveness. It's kind of the same argument, or not argument, but it's kind of the same concern with Ellerson Smith, where it's like he's not going up against NFL tackles every week. So when he dominates them, it's like, well, yeah, of course you did. So I am kind of curious to see how high he goes, how much teams value top-end competition. But he is a really good player. He's got some pretty good physical tools, and I don't think he's as much of a project as Joseph Osai. I think he could actually contribute earlier than Joseph Osai would, so he has that going for him. And then in our last tier, and again, this is not every edge rusher I've watched. These are just the ones that I'm kind of fitting into this tier. I have Quincy Roche, Cam Sample, Charles Snowden, who's coming off a broken ankle, which is why he's this low, and then Wyatt Hubert. Now, before I move on to our next position group, defensive tackle, I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this behemoth of an episode, because I know there's no way I'm going to make any Google ad revenue on it at all. It's going to get claimed because of all the college tape in here the second I upload it, but I digress. Thank you to Honey for making today's show possible and having my back with a sponsorship. Honey is a completely free browser extension that scours the internet for promo codes and automatically applies them whenever you go online shopping. Here's how it all works. You get Honey on your computer for free in just 2 easy clicks, and then whenever you're online shopping at any of their 30,000 supported websites, Honey will pop up, and all you have to do is just click Apply Coupons. You wait a few seconds while Honey searches for any coupons that apply to that site, and if it finds any, the prices on your items will drop instantly. I myself have used Honey repeatedly when buying production equipment to invest back in the channel recently because this stuff is expensive, and by now at this point, between coupons and sales alerts, I must have saved at least $100. Again, Honey is completely free. It'll work on whatever browser you prefer to use, and all you have to do to get it is go to joinhoney.com/Brett Coleman down in that link in the description below. Again, that is joinhoney.com/Brett Coleman, and you could start saving today. Now, moving on to defensive tackle, which might just be one of the, if not the weakest position group in this entire draft. It's very, very thin. I mean, like, historically thin. And even the guys at the top, like, they're not the same quality of, like, Quinnen Williams, Javon Kinlaw, like DeForest Buckner, if you want to expand it out to 5 techniques, Derek Brown last year. There's really nobody like that. Now, there are a few pretty good players here, don't get me wrong, but again, the top end isn't as high and the depth is not nearly as prevalent. So if your team needs a defensive tackle, and there are a few teams that really need defensive tackle, you might as well get one early because there's not very many good ones. Now, I will say that the two that I do have at the top in my tier 1, again, tier 1 this year is not the same as tier 1 in past years, but my 2 tier 1 defensive tackles are Levi Onwuzurike from Washington and Christian Barmore from Alabama. I would say that most people probably have Barmore as their DT1, and that's perfectly fine. Like, I'm not going to argue against that. That's why I have both of them in tier 1, because there's arguments for either one of them, and they can go in either order, and it would make sense to me. But I do feel like that Barmore is kind of the high floor play here, while Levi Onwuzurike might be the high ceiling play. I think that Levi's a little bit more explosive, a little bit quicker. As a pass rusher, I really, really like him. In that 3 down front at Washington, which I brought up with Joe Tryon, like, even though he was constantly double teamed, I mean constantly, he was still generating a lot of pressure. I mean, he plays his ass off. He really dominates centers. Like, he's too strong for most centers to handle, unless it's like a Landon Dickerson type, just a wall of a human being type of center. But these smaller, undersized centers that we're starting to see a lot more of, like, he absolutely crushes them. He's really, really quick as a pass rusher. And again, you really see the effort on tape. So I think that he can kind of be the high ceiling play for you. I'm not saying he's Chris Jones, but he does kind of remind me of Chris Jones when he was coming out of college. It's a pretty similar play style to me. So I think that he has a higher chance of getting to that level, whereas Barmore, I think, has a higher chance of just outright not busting. He's a very high floor play, very well coached, really long arms, not quite the same twitch, not quite the same wiggle, especially some of the other guys on this list, but he's really, really solid as a run defender. I mean, he stacks and sheds with ease. I think he could play kind of anything from a cock nose out to a 5 technique and at least have a base level of success. I don't think there's anything he's really bad at. And again, I think he's also a pretty decent pass rusher in his own right. I don't really think that he's anywhere near some of the other bigger name Alabama defensive linemen to come out in recent years. Deron Payne was a lot better in my opinion, especially as a nose tackle. Jonathan Allen was a lot more dynamic. Quinnen Williams was not even in the conversation. Like, that's a different species. So it is kind of a difference. I don't want to say a step down, but it's just a different kind of prospect between Barmore and those other guys. Again, very high floor player, very, very solid. Really came on towards the end of the season, but I do think that he's more the high floor play, whereas Levi's more the high ceiling play. And just depending on the team and the system and everything like that, they can kind of go in either order to me. And then in tier 2, I've got Milton Williams, Davion Nixon, Tommy Togiai, and Bobby Brown. I mean, there's some freak athletes in this tier. Again, not consistent at all and a little bit harder to project, but all of these guys are really, really good athletes, especially Milton Williams, who I put at the top of this tier. I think that he will probably be the second or third defensive tackle taken, maybe Davion Nixon ahead of him, but when you look at like just pure athletic profile, the only defensive tackle that I've ever seen be at or above Milton Williams' level is Aaron Donald. He's literally the only one. I mean, you look at height, weight, speed, vert, the cones. I mean, his hips are super fluid. He's unbelievably explosive. Again, competition level is kind of an issue with him, similar to like an Ellerson Smith, similar to, Malcolm Koontz. Like that's the one thing that I will say, people have questions about, because he was beating up on players that just frankly won't be in the league, and he definitely will be in the league. So it was a much different kind of experience compared to when he's going to be in the NFL and he has to go up against, Quentin Nelson every Sunday. But that being said, athletically, he is so special and so dynamic. I'm not saying that he will be Aaron Donald, but he's one of the few guys that's ever come out that athletically can do things that Aaron Donald can do, which at least gives him a chance to be a dynamic interior pass rusher. He's a really, really good player. And then Davion Nixon from Iowa, who, my God, there are some snaps where you look at him and you're like, whoa, that's Stephon Tuitt. And then there are some snaps where you look at him where you're like, whoa, that's a day 3 pick. And it's very, very inconsistent, and that's why I have him in tier 2. He's got tier 1 talent. I mean, you could argue that just on raw talent, he's got a case to be like, top 20 to 25 pick here. He's got 35-inch arms, really good hips for his size. I mean, really, really explosive first step. He's unbelievably gifted, but the consistency is just maddening. A lot of the best plays that you see from him are, like an outside zone play where he's shooting the gap and just absolutely obliterating everybody. But then they'll come back and run power at him, and he just doesn't really recognize it quickly. So he's not, like taking on a down block and locking out and shedding back inside to make a tackle. Like, I don't know, the recognition and instincts part of his game is still kind of a work in progress. So I can recognize the talent. I can recognize the ceiling. If he gets to that ceiling, he's going to be like a Stephon Tuitt, Cameron Hayward type guy. Like, he's a perfect Pittsburgh Steeler. But again, even if they did take him, you have to remember it's going to be a year or two, in my opinion, till he gets to that spot. Now, next on this list, within tier 2, we got Tommy Togiai from Ohio State, who's kind of the exact opposite of Nixon. I don't think he's as talented, but I do think that the floor is a little bit higher with him. I think he's a lot more polished product right now. I don't know if I would put him, with kind of like nose to 5-tech versatility like some of the other guys on this list. Like Levi and Barmore, I think, could do anything from cock nose to 5 technique. Togiai, I think, is just kind of a pure 3 technique. I don't necessarily think he has the anchor to take on double teams consistently if you were going to put him at nose or put him as like a 2-gapping 5 technique in a 3-4. I think he's really comfortable as a 3 technique. If I was going to compare play styles, I'd say like Sharif Floyd is pretty similar. Like, he's more of a power rusher, but again, only against one guy, not against 2. But he does have really nice hips to kind of flatten and finish when he does get penetration. Not the best first step, but it's good enough. Not overwhelming power, but it is pretty good. Really, really disciplined in run defense. Like, he's a very solid player. Again, I'm not super excited about any one aspect of his game, but I don't think he really has any true weaknesses either. So I think a solid day 2 pick sounds about right. And then lastly here in tier 2, I have another freak of nature, although not quite the same freak of nature profile as Milton Williams and Davion Nixon, because Bobby Brown III from Texas A&M is more a freak of nature of the nose tackle variety, just 320 pounds of muscle that, it's not as fast and it's not as quick as some of these other guys, but guess what? You're not going to move him off the line of scrimmage. I mean, he is so explosive for his size and so strong, and it's like a human tree stump. You really can't dig him out in the run game. He's not going to go anywhere. And I think when you look at his talent level, it kind of reminds me of like a Linval Joseph, which I know is kind of sacrilegious because Linval Joseph is one of the greatest nose tackles I've ever seen in my life. I'm not saying that he has the same level of instincts or technique, but in terms of raw physical ability, he is a Linval Joseph type profile. And that should probably scare the shit out of some people because Linval was a freak. And I think Bobby Brown, if you put him with the right defensive line coach, with the right team that can develop him, it's a similar kind of thing with Nixon. It's going to take a year or two, but if it pays off, you're getting an all-pro nose tackle out of that. So it is a worthy investment with a day 2 pick. And I do inevitably think he is going to go day 2 because of that talent. I don't know where on day 2, because that's a very wide range of picks, but there's not a lot of good defensive tackles in this class, and he's one of the most talented ones of the bunch. He's more talented than the tier 1 guys, I'll just say that. Like in terms of physical ability, he's more talented than those guys. He's just not as good of a football player right now, so you kind of have to trust your coaching staff on this one. And then tier 3, I'll just kind of run through these 5 really quickly because these guys are all likely going to be day 3 picks. At least I assume they're going to be day 3 picks. We have Aleem McNeil, Tyler Shelvin, Osa Odigizua, Taquan Graham, and Jonathan Marshall. Now, let's move to corner, which, in my opinion, contrary to defensive tackle, corner this year is absolutely loaded. This is one of the best DB classes overall in recent memory, but especially at corner. I mean, I'm talking several Pro Bowl caliber players probably by the end of their rookie contract, or at least within the first 5 or 6 years. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if there's 2 to 3 all-pros that end up coming out of this group as well. Again, it's just supremely, monumentally talented. So saying all that, we might as well start at the very, very top because my tier 1 of corners is as good as it possibly gets. I have no fewer than 6 corners in my tier 1 for this group, which is utterly ridiculous. I considered having J.C. Horn in his own tier, by the way, just because he is my highest graded corner, but I mean, kind of looking back on it, Patrick Surtain, Greg Newsome, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Caleb Farley, and Tyson Campbell, they're all not that far away from Horn in terms of grade, in my opinion. So in the end, I decided let's just throw them all into one single tier 1, and we'll talk about them all together because, honestly, I kind of expect all these guys to be first-round picks anyway, so they're all kind of close-ish. Now, J.C. Horn at the very, very tippy top, obviously I think he's my DB1 in this class. He's the highest grade I've given to any DB since Jalen Ramsey coming out. If you want to know more about why, you can go watch my film room on him that I put out a couple weeks ago. I mean, he's just a phenomenal corner at pretty much everything. He plays press, he plays off. He's very, very physical. As an athlete, I mean, he's literally historically athletic. When you look at his relative athleticism score, I think he came out as either the number 1 or number 2 corner prospect out of every single corner in the last 30 years. So he's really a ridiculous athlete. And when you package that with his long arms, his physicality, his technique, I mean, he's about as ready-made a press corner prospect as you can possibly find. And then right behind him, Patrick Surtain, also, again, a ready-made press and press bail corner from day 1. And he's also a phenomenal athlete in his own right. And I think we would be talking more about his athleticism if Horn wasn't in this class. But the fact that Horn is that ridiculous kind of overshadowed Surtain, in my opinion. But still, compared to 99% of all corner prospects in the last few decades, he's a pretty crazy athlete. High 4.3, jumps out the gym, really fluid hips, long arms. I mean, he's got everything you want. He just happens to be in the same class as J.C. Horn, so I feel like he gets overshadowed a little bit. But when you look at him on tape, I mean, it's hard not to love everything you see. He's super patient, super technically refined. Obviously, very few receivers are ever going to run away from him down the field. That's why he was almost unbeatable down the boundary, because he's too fast, he's too physical, he's too patient. You're just not going to complete any go balls on him. I only saw like a couple receivers in his entire career beat him outside the numbers down the field, and they're all going to be in the NFL. I mean, he just flat out doesn't give up deep balls very often, which, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I tend to like that quality in a corner where the only thing they're giving up is within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, which for Patrick Surtain, I mean, yeah, he'll give up quick stuff inside every now and then, but I mean, fuck it. I got linebackers to make the tackle for that. As long as you don't give up the 45-yard bomb down the sideline, we're good. And Patrick Surtain doesn't give up the bombs. So I think he's a really, really good corner. I think he's a day one starter in the NFL and a very high quality one at that. And if he got past Philly at 12, quite frankly, I'd be stunned. After Surtain, I have a trio of off-cover corners with Greg Newsome, Ifeatu Melifonwu, and Caleb Farley. Melifonwu and Farley in particular have the size to be press corners, but I feel like they're more comfortable in off coverage. I mean, they're really, really explosive athletes, especially at their size. And when you package that with their length and their physicality, like Melifonwu in particular against the run is just a demon out there. Like, he doesn't give a shit. He's going to throw receivers off to the side and make the tackle almost like a linebacker would. He's very, very physical. And again, his movement skills at his size are just top tier. I would love to see him get a little bit more comfortable in press so that he's more scheme diverse. But, you know, a guy with his kind of athletic profile already being good in off coverage, I think no matter what, he's going to have a day one role in the NFL and be a quality starter. And as he kind of develops and, you know, learns proper press technique and drills himself and everything like that, he can become a more well-rounded corner in the league and hopefully become what I think he is, which is a Pro Bowl caliber corner. Now, Farley, I think, is a similar kind of profile. He's much more comfortable in off than he is in press, even though he has the size to kind of profile as a press corner. It just kind of seems to me like he loves to pedal and drive on receivers because he's so explosive that he can honestly get there when most corners wouldn't be able to play that way. And he also kind of likes to give himself some leeway where if he bites on the first move and then somebody runs behind him, he knows he has the recovery speed to get back there and break it up anyway. I mean, we've saw that a few times with him already where, you know, he'll take the first move and be aggressive because he knows that, hey, if they get me, I can get back in phase before the ball gets there, which is kind of a skill set, or I'll say a handicap, that very few other corners I've ever seen have. Like, his makeup speed is legendary. And I don't want to use, you know, getting beat as a positive, but when he gets beat, he doesn't really get beat. And that's saying a lot. So I kind of like to leave him in off and play that style just because it works for him. And we'll develop, you know, the press technique and stuff as time goes on. Now, I will say about the injury, that is a little bit of a concern for me. I did some research on it, and there were a few, you know, orthopedic surgeons on YouTube that did articles about it and made videos about it. And basically what you need to know is there's an 80% recovery rate, but there also is a 20% chance that he won't properly recover and might need a spinal fusion to fix the problem. So that's kind of a rough number for me to hear, you know, knowing that there's a 20% chance that a potential first round pick could need a spinal fusion. Like, that's a not insignificant chance here. So that does kind of drop him a little bit for me. Like, I would understand if he doesn't go day one just because of that medical uncertainty. It has nothing to do with him as a player. Like, he's a great player. But yeah, I mean, 80% recovery rate is good. But for a guy that you're investing a first round pick in a loaded corner class, when you can get a guy like Ifeatu Melifonwu or Greg Newsome, who I'm about to talk about, that has a similar skill set that doesn't come with that kind of medical baggage, yeah, that's a tough call for me to make. Now, Greg Newsome himself also has some injury issues, so I'm not going to completely gloss over that. Durability has been a concern for him. So if you're looking at this trio of off corners, Melifonwu has the cleanest, durability history out of the three. Again, I'm not saying he's guaranteed to stay healthier than them long term. I'm just kind of going off what we have here. But in terms of on the field stuff, Newsome is just a crazy good off cover corner. He's got some of the best feet and hips in this class, if not the best feet and hips. His T-step is just wicked fast. He gets his hips around so quick as well whenever he does get beat. And, with that 4.3 speed, similar to Farley, when he does get beat, he gets back in phase really, really fast. So he's very, very hard to beat deep down the field. He's hard to get the cheap stuff on underneath because, again, he can T-step and close at just an unreal pace. And overall, he's a very, very good, patient, technically efficient, fast, fluid corner. There's almost nothing wrong with him, in my opinion, except durability. So again, he's another one of these guys where I wouldn't be surprised to see him slip a little bit, just like Farley, because of durability. I'm not saying he'll slip out of the first round guaranteed, but it is something that teams are going to have to dig into, and Honestly, some teams will care and some teams won't. I guess we'll find out. And then last but not least in this tier 1, I have Tyson Campbell from Georgia. And this might be a little bit higher of a grade than you're used to seeing for Campbell from some other people. There's a few analysts out there that are as high on him as I am, but I'll try to make my case here. He's a very, very patient corner, and he's very good at kind of reading routes as they develop. He doesn't take the cheese too often. You could tell that he's very disciplined, very well coached, also extraordinarily physically gifted. Again, he's another one of these guys that are long, jumps out the gym, runs sub 4.4. There's a lot of those guys this year, and he's one of them. But that speed shows up on tape. Like, that's not a fake pro day time. He is a legit sub 4.4 kind of guy. And as a press and bail corner in that Georgia system, which is very similar to what Alabama does, he has a skill set that I think is very in demand in the NFL today, which is being able to press guys at the line of scrimmage. If you are the lone receiver in like a 3-by-1 and you're going up against the X receiver that's all by himself out on an island, like, you have to be able to play press man coverage, because on the trip side of the formation, everybody else is going to be playing match zones to that side, and you're going to be all alone. Like, that's kind of the in vogue thing to do now, is you're playing 2 high safety looks, you're playing match quarters, you have one corner on the outside that can play man with no help, and everybody else gets help. Tyson Campbell can do that, or if he's on the trip side, he's a very instinctive zone corner where, he can play outside leverage, kind of in that Kyle Fuller style, and drive on balls underneath. Like, he's a very, very good zone corner. So that versatility, that athleticism, that discipline, all of it kind of adds up, in my opinion, to being a very pro-ready prospect. And he's another one of these guys that, if Farley falls because of medical, and if Newsome falls because of medical, Tyson Campbell could very easily go in the top 25 picks. Like, he's talented enough to be picked in that range, and I wouldn't be shocked by that. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Now, in tier 2, just below Campbell, I only have 4 names, but they're all really exciting to me, and all of them I think could very easily be top 50 picks as well, and that's Asante Samuel Jr., Paulson Adibo, Kelvin Joseph, and Eric Stokes, also from Georgia. Now, Asante Samuel is, honestly, he's his father. He plays the exact same style. They're the same build, they're the same everything. Like, I see his dad in him, which is saying a lot because his dad was a phenomenal player. I will say this, though. There are some systems that I'm not quite sure he would fit as well. If it's like a Miami or a New England where we're playing a lot of press man coverage all the time, that's not really his game. Not that Flores and Bill would make him play press man coverage, because they're not idiots. They would let him do what he's best at, but you get what I'm saying. In a press man system, that's not really his skill set. I want him playing off coverage, because his T-step is just, again, it's like Newsome. It's ridiculously fast. He's super explosive downhill. He doesn't have the best long speed, but again, just like his dad, if I'm having him play from the top down and drive on stuff underneath and go get interceptions, he can do that just fine. I think he would probably thrive in a zone system, something that lets him play 7 or 8 yards off from outside leverage, where he can just look at quarterbacks and drive on footballs and pick them off. Like, that is his comfort zone. And even though there's not a whole lot of defenses that might let him play exclusively in that style, if he does land in that kind of defense, I think he would be very, very successful. Now, Adibo and Joseph, I think in terms of stylistically, they kind of play similar to Samuel. They're more zone corners than anything else, but physical skill set wise, I think they're a little bit different. Samuel, I think, is a little bit quicker and more explosive in short areas, whereas Adibo and Joseph, I think, have better long speed, so they're a little bit more rangy. And I also think that they have, at least Adibo in particular, has better ball skills than any other DB in this class. Like, when you look at his range, you look at his hands, his ability to track deep down the field, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, he's got utterly insane ball skills for a DB, which is why he had so many pass breakups and interceptions in his first 2 years in college football, because, anytime somebody tested him, he was liable to pick it off. He's got crazy good ball skills. And I think he would kind of fit best as a zone corner, where he can, again, use that explosiveness and his really fluid hips and, I'll say it again, ball skills to get his hands on passes and generate as many turnovers as possible. But again, I do think that he has a little bit better long speed than Samuel, even though he's not as quick in short areas. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. You know, if you're more looking to play like a lot of cover 3 where you really need that long speed, that range on the back end, and obviously the length and size that Adibo has as well, you're going to want to go with him, or to a lesser extent, Kelvin Joseph, who also plays in that style. But, you know, if you want to play more cover 2 or, you know, 2 read, anything like that, I think Samuel would probably be a better fit for that just because of his physical skill set. So it just kind of depends on the defense that you're running, and then you can kind of pick and choose which one of these 3 zone corners you really, really want. And then Eric Stokes, I think he's more of a man corner, like a true press man corner. I think that's really his comfort spot, at least it was at Georgia. So again, you know, he would fit defenses more in the mold of what New England wants or Miami wants. Not that Miami's going to take a corner because they got a million of them already, but I'm just saying stylistically, he would fit what they like to do. And before you come at me with, oh, well, Devonte Smith got the better of him. Yeah, no shit. Devonte Smith gets the better of everybody. Like, he's still a pretty good press man corner. He just happens to get beat by one of the best receiver prospects that we've seen in the last 10 to 15 years. So yeah, he's going to get beat by Devonte Smith. It's going to happen, but he still held his own. I mean, he gave Smith a really good fight there, even though he got, honestly, mossed a couple times. It's going to happen, but he's a very good corner, a very good press man corner specifically, and I think there are some teams that are going to highly, and I mean highly, covet that skill set. Now, in Tier 3, I've got Benjamin St-Juste, Keith Taylor Jr., Tay Gowan, Aaron Robinson, and Elijah Molden. And yes, I'm aware, again, there's a lot more corners available than this, but these are just kind of the top 15 to 16 guys that really stood out to me, and they're the ones that I kind of want to highlight because these are all the guys that I would draft in the first 3 to 4 rounds. So those are my 15 corners, at least my top 15 corners, and they're all really, really good players, even going into the day 3 guys. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 or 6 years we look back at this corner class and we see it as one of the best groups in the last couple decades. Now, last but not least, certainly not least, we have safety, which is honestly a decent group this year. It's not like on the high end of safety classes, I would say, in recent memory, but it's certainly not on the low end either. I think it's at least average, maybe slightly above average if some of these kind of, go to the right situations that maximize their skill set. I don't know about superstars other than Andre Cisco. If he stays healthy, I think he can be an actual superstar, but just a lot of really high quality role players, guys that are going to stick in the league for a really long time. Just a solid safety class with a lot of genuinely quality players. I'll start with my tier 1 here, which has 4 guys in it. Andre Cisco from Syracuse, Trayvon Marig from TCU, Javon Holland from Oregon, and Tyree Gillespie from Mizzou. Now, if you want to know my full thoughts on Gillespie, you can go back and watch my first draft video. I did this entire draft season back in February. That was on, a bunch of underrated players, 5 underrated players specifically, and he was one of the first ones I highlighted out of every prospect in this entire class because I'm excited about him that much. Even just the Alabama game alone, if you just watch that game and probably the Florida game too, like that's literally all you need to see from him. The fact that he has, pass breakups against Devonte Smith and Kyle Pitts in this class, he has goal line stops against Najee Harris. Like his resume from this past season against other future high quality NFL starters is pretty insane. Like no other safety in this class has that kind of resume. And then when you throw in the fact that he's really physically gifted, I mean, he tested very, very well, especially for a safety. He's got size, he's got speed, he's got fluidity, he's got experience, he's got the good tape. There's really not much not to love here. Tyree Gillespie is an awesome safety, and I fully acknowledge he's not going to be one of the first 4 safeties drafted. I just kind of wanted to plant my flag in the dirt here and say that I believe in this dude, and I think he's going to be a quality NFL starter. And then Javon Holland, he just took last season off. He was one of the opt-outs from the Pac-12, which there were a lot of opt-outs because their season was kind of completely screwed up. But he's kind of an interesting one because I actually think he was a better player in 2018 where they had him more at free safety than at 2019 where they played him as kind of like a quasi-nickel. Like, he played nickel just fine, but I truly think his role in the NFL is free safety. He's got the range, he's got the ball skills. Like, I want him to be a true center fielder. And out of all the safeties in this class, other than Andre Cisco, who I'll talk about in a second, he is the best pure center fielder in this group. So I kind of project him to that role in the NFL. There's a lot of teams that still run primarily single high coverages. Even if they're presenting a 2-high shell before the snap, most of them are still going to roll 1 high after the snap. Like, I don't think there was any teams that ran 2-high coverages more than maybe 40% of the time last year. So it's still very much a 1-high league, which means you need rangy, athletic, really good free safeties with ball skills to patrol the deep middle of the field. And Javon Holland is that kind of guy. And then I also like Trayvon Marig a lot, which, as we see, the split field stuff start to become more popular in the NFL, it's kind of trickled its way up from college. We see Brandon Staley do it. We see Vic Fangio do it, having those 2-high safety looks, and you can kind of roll into a 1-high out of it, or you can just play match quarters from it. Like, that's a very common thing, or at least a more common thing in the NFL these days than it used to be a decade ago. And Marig is kind of tailor-made for that style. Like, they played a lot of split field stuff at TCU. That was almost exclusively what they ran, was split field coverages. And he's a guy that can kind of do a little bit of everything. Like, if you want him to cover deep down the field, he can absolutely do that. Like, he can match a really fast slot receiver as a safety from like a 15-yard cushion and still keep up with him, 30 to 40 yards down the field. That's really hard to do. He's gotten a couple pass breakups and interceptions on plays that most safeties wouldn't athletically be capable of doing. Like, he's a very, very good athlete. But the fact that he can still come down and play the run from that 2-high look, because safeties are expected to get involved in the run fit from a 12 to 15 yard shelf, like, that's an important thing to me too. The fact that he is versatile enough to make an impact on run downs or on pass downs. So I'm looking at a bigger safety that plays the run, but also can match receivers one-on-one down the field. You can put him in the deep post and he'll be okay there. Like, he wouldn't be as good as Javon Holland, and he definitely wouldn't be as good as Andre Cisco, but he can do it. You can put him in like press man coverage on a tight end and he'll be okay. Like, he just kind of does a little bit of everything. And in an NFL where defense is rapidly changing and we're starting to see teams kind of move away from that Pete Carroll cover 3 meta that took over the league, and now we're starting to see a lot more match quarter stuff, a lot more cover 2, a lot more cover 5. Even if 1-high defenses are still predominantly what's used, the scales are tipping back a little bit, and getting a versatile safety that can kind of do a little bit of everything is critical to embrace that style of defense. And then last but not least, Andre Cisco rounds out tier 1. I could argue that he's the best safety in this class, to be honest. The only reason why he's in a tier not by himself above everybody else is because he's coming off an ACL. I'm not entirely sure where he is in the recovery process, to be honest. I haven't looked into it too much, but he did just tear it in November, so it's kind of a recent thing. He's still coming back from it. Theoretically, he should be available by training camp, but I guess we'll see. But in terms of the player that he is on the field, Andre Cisco is tremendously talented. I mean, I'm talking legit 4.3 speed, probably a 38 to 40 inch vertical from what I remember. And I mean, the guy's built like Jamal Adams, so he can really take punishment down in the box as well. He just checks every single box you want from a safety, just a freak among freaks. And when you look at his ball production, I mean, going back to when he was a teenager, like I'm talking a true freshman in the ACC going up against future NFL quarterbacks, and he's getting All-American consideration. Like, he's leading the team and leading the conference in picks. Just incredible instincts, phenomenal range. I mean, the guy's one of the freakiest safeties that we've seen come out in the last 4 or 5 years. And that's saying something because we've had some freaks come out of college football. I know that he can get caught sometimes and give up a big play because he's almost aggressive to a fault sometimes. But when you look at his ball production, the turnovers he generates, the juice that he brings to a defense, I mean, in the end, I think it's all worth it. Again, if you're putting him in the right system where it's like, hey, we're going to play single high, you're our Earl Thomas, go get the football, he's going to go get the football, and he's going to get the football a lot. Now, in Tier 2, I've got 4 more safeties: Richie Grant, Jamar Johnson, Ardarius Washington, and Derek Forrest. All of them are wildly different from one another. Richie Grant is probably the most well-rounded of the bunch. I mean, he can play center field. He plays the run really well. I mean, you can put him in the slot and he'll handle business there. I mean, they even played some reps with him at corner at the Senior Bowl and he held his own. So, again, he's kind of like, if you miss out on Trayvon Marig, you can get Richie Grant in the next round and feel pretty good about it. He's very much a jack-of-all-trades safety. He's not really bad at anything, but he's good at everything. And so I think he's a very, very, very solid player. He's probably going to end up playing in the league for a pretty long time because, again, he's not bad at anything. And then Jamar Johnson, he's kind of a darling of mine. If you watch my Justin Fields live stream a few weeks ago, it might have been over a month ago at this point. I mean, the mind games that he was able to play with Justin Fields at the line of scrimmage were just really, really entertaining for me to watch. And again, this is a guy that just kind of does a little bit of everything. He got an interception while in single high. I mean, he had some really good rushes as a blitzer. Tackling can be a little bit spotty, but I don't think it's for lack of effort. I just think he's just not that big. And of course, he's not that athletic either. His testing numbers were a little bit disappointing to me, but again, just when you throw in the tape, he's so instinctive and so smart, and he plays with such great effort. The fact that he was able to cause so many problems for a future top 3 pick at quarterback and one of the best quarterback prospects of the last few classes, that means a lot to me. If you can frustrate Justin Fields like he frustrated Justin Fields, that means that you can be a pretty good NFL player. I know he's not that athletic. That's why he's in Tier 2 for me. But again, I just think if you put him in the right system and you give him a chance, I think he could be a really good player for you. And I would say the same thing about Ardarius Washington as well. He's really small. His top end speed is not great, but the instincts, the intelligence, the toughness, they played him at boundary side safety in TCU, even when he's 5'8". And the boundary side safety at TCU typically has to get involved in the run fit quite a bit, and they were not worried about that at all. I mean, the dude comes downhill. He plays aggressively. He's not afraid to stick his nose into the trash, which for a safety of his size to have that kind of feistiness against the run, I really like that. And of course, he has a lot of instincts in zone coverage as well. I don't really have any worries about him getting ball production at the next level. Again, I don't really think that I would put him as a center fielding safety for me. I don't think the range is there for that. But if you're looking at him as a nickel safety, a safety that can play in 2 high for you, and then if you really insist on 1 high, he's the one that drops down to play a hook zone for you instead of playing deep. Or if you want him to play nickel for you and then bring in a third safety, you can do that too. I wouldn't really fault you for that because he is really quick in short areas. He just doesn't have great long speed. So again, he can kind of do a little bit of everything. And the fact that he plays so tough and with such good instincts, I'm just a big fan of Ardarius Washington. I have no idea where he's going to go because he's small, but he's just a good football player, and I enjoy watching good football players. And then last but not least in this tier, I have Derek Forrest from Cincinnati, who is a freak athlete, almost as athletic as Andre Cisco, maybe not quite to that level, but it's pretty damn close. His relative athletic score is off the freaking charts for his size, really fluid hips, really good range, not just explosive in short areas, but he's got long speed too. I kind of think that he fits best in a single high, cover 3 style defense, not necessarily just as the free safety, but I think with his cover skills in man, you could probably play him as the down safety as well that typically carries the number 2 receiver up the field and kind of takes some pressure off the free safety so they don't have to cover both seams at once. I could very easily see him do that role. And specifically for Gus Bradley, I don't really think he has anybody with the Raiders right now that can do that, or at least can do that effectively. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Derek Forrest as a Raider this coming season because he kind of fits what they need, to be honest. And finally, tier number 3 here, I have 5 names that you should all be on the lookout for. James Wiggins, who was Derek Forrest's teammate at Cincinnati. Hamza Nasirildeen from Florida State, who's got obscenely long arms. Talanoa Hufanga from USC. Brady Breeze from Oregon. And Josh Bledsoe, Tyree Gillespie's running mate from Mizzou. So that'll do it. That'll wrap up my first annual defensive position ranking special. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I'm sure I got a bunch of shit wildly wrong, and I guess we'll find out in 2 or 3 years what that is. Although I have a sneaking suspicion you guys will fill my comment sections with what I get wrong no matter what, because you love me like that. So I'll be back later this week with my offensive position rankings. My quarterback positional rankings, obviously, is part of that. And then Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, knowing me, most likely Wednesday, I'll have my mock draft special out for everyone. You guys have been asking for that for months now, so I think you guys are going to really enjoy that. And yeah, stay happy, stay healthy. Draft is almost here. It's almost over. And then we can finally put this Mac Jones versus Justin Fields madness behind us. I'm sure you guys are as sick of it as I am. So I'll see you guys in a few days. Hopefully I'm still alive by then. And until then, cheers.